The World Food Programme wins the Nobel Peace Prize for its noble work. The UN agency is given the prestigious award for its fight against hunger. But with poverty on the rise, how much more do they need to do, and do they have the support to do it? I'm Ali Aslan, and today on The Newsmakers, we look at the challenges facing the World Food Programme. Food is a basic need, and the planet produces more than enough for everyone. Yet millions are still starving. The World Food Programme has been helping some of the most vulnerable, and it's that work that earned them this year's Nobel Peace Prize. But tragically, the UN agency is really only scratching the surface. Almost 700 million people worldwide still don't have enough to eat. And with conflict and the coronavirus crippling global economies, that number will only get higher. So the World Food Programme clearly has a lot on its plate. But does it have the resources to provide for those in need and one day eradicate global hunger? We'll discuss that in a moment, but first, Adam Platz has this report.
The 101st Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to the World Food Programme. The United Nations organization works to combat hunger worldwide, but was also recognized for improving the conditions for peace in conflict zones.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee wishes to emphasize that providing assistance to increase food security not only prevents hunger, but can also help to improve prospects for stability and peace. The World Food Programme has taken the lead in combining humanitarian work with peace efforts through pioneering projects in South America, Africa, and Asia.
Each year, the WFP provides food for 100 million people in 88 countries, reaching the most vulnerable victims of wars and natural disasters. In 2019, it delivered 4.2 million tons of food, often preventing starvation in some of the world's most remote and dangerous locations. Many people in war-torn countries like Yemen and South Sudan are close to entirely dependent on the organization. The Nobel Committee says their decision was partly aimed at encouraging multilateral cooperation, which it says the World Food Programme exemplifies. As one of its Sustainable Development Goals, the United Nations aims to end hunger by 2030, but the World Food Programme faces multiple challenges. Chief among them is securing adequate funds. Despite being critical of other UN organizations, the US is the World Food Programme's largest funder, followed by Germany, the UK, and the EU. In 2019, the World Food Programme reached record levels of contributions, totaling $8 billion, but says it has a $4 billion funding gap if it is to reach its goals.
Well, hopefully the prize will be a call to action for people all over the world to come to the aid of those who are suffering and struggling and starving to death. Hopefully be a call to action for the billionaires to step up. Hopefully be a call to action for the men and women that are creating war and conflict, and primarily men. It's a call to action to end the war of these man-made conflicts. If we can end the wars, we can end hunger.
There are some 690 million people facing hunger in the world today, and 60% of them live in countries affected by conflict. The UN has warned that if the World Food Programme and other food assistance organizations are not properly funded, there could be 840 million hungry people by 2030. So, which way will it go? Towards what the Nobel Committee has described as a possible hunger crisis of inconceivable proportions, or a world where the funding is available and nobody goes to bed hungry? Adam Platz, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Cairo is Abeer Etefa. She's a senior spokesperson for the UN World Food Programme for the Middle East, North Africa, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. Dave Harden is in Washington, D.C. He was a senior official with USAID for the West Bank and Gaza. And in Oslo is Benedicte Giaever. She's the executive director of NORCAP, which is the Norwegian Refugee Council's global provider of humanitarian expertise. Abeer, the Nobel Peace Prize has been awarded to the UN. World Food Program this year for its effort to combat hunger and improve conditions for peace. Quite a jubilant day for your organization, undoubtedly. How surprised were you?
It was quite a surprise. Over 300 organizations and people have been nominated to this prize. And we haven't had any, of course, indication that we are going to be on the award list. So, of course, it was a big surprise to us. The executive director of the World Food Program was in a field mission in Africa. He was in Niger that morning. So it was, and for many of us across the world, it was really a very big surprise and a very pleasant one. So we're extremely humbled that we have been honored with the Nobel Peace Prize, the first in the history of the organization, which was established in the early 60s.
Quite a gratifying day for sure for the World Food Program. Dave, you're quite experienced in the field of development work. Did the committee make the right choice?
They did. WFP is an extraordinary organization. They do amazing work all over the world. It's an accolade to the organization, but also a call to action and a recognition that multilateralism works.
And Benedicte, certainly you have seen your fair share of hardship on the part of many human beings all across the world, and the WFP provides very essential work here, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think this prize is very timely, but first let me congratulate you on this extremely important prize. But the timeliness is also a fact, a very sad fact, that over 80 million people have had to flee their homes. And many of these, actually 80% of these, are finding themselves in places where there's a complete lack of food and malnutrition. So already there we are struggling. And there's no doubt that there is enough food to go around for the whole globe. But it's because of the conflicts, it's because of natural hazards like drought, floods, locusts, and now, last but not least, the COVID, which makes it even more difficult.
Indeed.
And I think...
Please, go ahead.
Also, the connection to peace is extremely important here. Hunger fuels conflict and violence, but violence and conflict also fuels hunger. And I think this is something that we need to get much more attention to in order to combat this enormous catastrophe we have in front of us.
Abeer, Benedicte has already mentioned the pandemic. Indeed, the committee said the pandemic had further boosted the importance of the WFP. And it was the WFP who earlier this year actually said the pandemic could cause widespread famines of biblical proportions. Have your fears been materialized?
We are in the middle of it, and I think every day it's becoming more clear that the crisis is not yet far from over. And it's also coming at a time when the world's economy is suffering, and which means that the contributions of our donor countries, the public, and the traditional sources where we get the money are drying up. So we're actually seeing that this is going to be an incredibly difficult year for the world's most vulnerable populations, the 100 million people that WFP is assisting, and the increasing number. We're projecting that before the end of this year, we're probably going to reach 270 million people who are food insecure and unable to put food on the table for their families. So it is going to be remarkably difficult. And this is why the Peace Prize is coming at a very significant time, because it's not just a recognition of the work of the World Food Program, but it's actually, it puts the focus on the plight of the millions of hungry people around the world. And as your guest said, on the strong association between hunger and conflict, because hunger feeds conflict and conflict feeds hunger. But we are in the middle of a pandemic, also seeing lives shattered, livelihoods lost, people unable to secure their basic needs.
And indeed, the WFP, Dave, has provided assistance to 100 million people in 88 countries last year alone. Some of them, of course, Yemen, Afghanistan, South Sudan. The list is unfortunately quite long. Hunger is still being used as a weapon of war quite extensively, isn't it?
It is, and it's a tragedy. I mean, a great example right now is Yemen. both in terms of what the Houthis are doing in blocking access to 80% of the population, and what the Saudi-led coalition is doing in kind of limiting or constraining access through all the different ports and all the overland. So, hunger cannot be used as a weapon of war. I mean, that's immoral. That's tragic. That's a gross violation of all human rights.
But Benedict, you of course have already mentioned the correlation between hunger and conflicts that are taking place, unfortunately, all across the world. Now, what is your advice? What is your advice to the WFP in times like these, where we see multiple regional conflicts and never-ending conflict, it seems, like in Yemen, Afghanistan, or South Sudan?
I mean, first of all, World Food Programme is doing a tremendous job, but I think everybody working within the humanitarian sector, we all need to join forces together, because we can't combat it as a single agency or as a single NGO, single organization. So we need to all join forces, and we also need to see how we can work closer with the development sector. And last but not least, also see how we can build alliances into the peace building. Because at the same time, we are not going to be able to raise enough funds as it is per today. And with the increasing number of conflicts and natural disasters, we are going to face an ever-increasing problem. So we need to also work in terms of mitigating these, and also see how we can work more preventive in order to stop these conflicts from arising.
Both you and Abeer, of course, have mentioned the need and necessity and relevance of fundraising and donors. Abeer, how hopeful are you that this prize will give your organization the much-needed boost for donors to step up, not just on a national level, but also individuals, billionaires, millionaires, people out there with the means to provide and assist?
This prize could not come at a better time. This is the time where the world needs to come together, and it's not just WFP. It's WFP partners, the governments, as well as the donor countries. And as the executive director put it very clearly, there are many billionaires around this world, and there are some very wealthy people who've made money during the times of COVID. But this is the time when we need to come together, private sector, individuals, organizations, donor countries, and host governments, and get together, because it's a very critical moment where we're seeing setbacks in our zero hunger by 2030 goal. We're not gonna achieve this goal if we don't come together, and also without the proper investment. And the investment here is not just by handing food assistance. That's one big part of it, but there has to be building the resilience of people, investment in the agriculture section, helping building the capacity of the smallholder farmers, reducing food losses, stopping the food waste. It's a number of factors that we need to get to our goal by 2030. But it's definitely going to be a difficult year, and this is why in the World Food Programme we are extremely appreciative of this prize awarded to us at 2020.
Dave, interestingly enough, despite its retreat from world affairs and the America First policy on the part of Donald Trump, the US is still by far the biggest donor of the World Food Programme, something you think will remain regardless of the outcome of the November 3rd election?
I'm not sure, actually. I mean, I'm proud of the fact that the United States exhibits leadership in the World Food Programme, but I would like that to continue, and I don't know what the Trump administration would do in a second administration. But let me just say one thing. Without any additional funding, WFP has a number of options ahead of it to kind of blunt crises through deeper famine security warning systems, through climate change and long-term forecasting, through innovation that would allow quicker, better, more effective supply chains to get food to people. And I think that regardless of where the U.S. is, the innovation drive that is going to be required for the next decade is going to be critical, and WFP has an opportunity really to lead in that space.
Benedict, if we look at the numbers, quite depressing and staggering. Almost 700 million people today still face hunger on a daily basis. That conflicts with the reports that we're getting from the so-called civilized developed world, where obesity is a huge growing problem. Almost unthinkable, isn't it?
Absolutely, but I think we have to look at what's behind all of this. And what we see, what is very concerning now, that inequality is on the increase in many countries. Even in my own country, Norway, there is an increase in terms of inequality between the rich and the poor. And this is something we see all over the world. So I really fear for what the next 20, 30 years will bring us. So I think we really need to come to grips with that and change the overall global policy. So we have to bring the gap between inequality down, and we really need to work much more in terms of how to prevent and how to mitigate the different disasters that's taking place. But this is everybody's responsibility. And I think all politicians there need to realize this, also at a time when they would like to go to war and a time where they support different actors, which again fuels several conflicts. So I think this is something we all need to realize the breadth and extent of.
Indeed, Abeer, the agency was established in '61, interestingly enough, at the behest of a US president, back then President Dwight Eisenhower. So the prize, in a way, is also a message, isn't it, about the importance of multilateralism at a time when nationalism seems to be back on the national agenda.
Indeed, WFP was established and has progressed over the years from an agency where food surpluses are moving from one part of the world to other countries where food was scarce. And over the years, the agency has developed and progressed to using multiple ways of assisting the hungry poor, whether through electronic vouchers, through providing cash, providing food assistance in the traditional ways, very strong logistics and supply chain channels. During the times of COVID, many countries have come together to support the World Food Programme, where at one point at the height of COVID-19, we were the largest airline in the world, bringing aid workers from one part of the world to the other, especially in the areas where flights were not operating. And these are the areas, of course, the front line of conflict. So I think that multiple UN agencies, and WFP, of course, is one of them, are a very strong showcase of the importance of multilateralism at this time in the very challenging times in the world.
Very challenging indeed. Dave, the WFP was founded almost 60 years ago, as I said, under the guidance and leadership of a US president. Success story, no doubt, particularly in light of the Nobel Peace Prize. Do you think such a success story would be possible today under the current circumstances?
Look, the generation ahead, the challenges ahead of us are going to be immense, and they might even be bigger than what we faced when we were, in the 60s and the 70s. And so that will require leadership and innovation. And by the way, it also requires more than just U.S. leadership, right? I mean, you probably have at least 60, 80 countries that could be substantial contributors into the World Food Programme and into the drive of innovation over the next decade. And it's going to have to be all of these countries, because it's a consequence for all of them that we drive stability and good governance and good outcomes. So, yeah, I'm optimistic that the future can be bright, but it takes guts, it takes courage, it takes leadership, and it takes resources.
All of the above are very much needed, Benedict, in times like these. One of the UN's SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, is to end hunger by 2030. That's only 10 years from now. If we look at the staggering numbers of 700 million people facing hunger on a daily basis today, how realistic is it to achieve these goals?
Well, if everybody was willing to work towards that, I think it could, of course, we could make it see through. But I think with the political climate today, I think it's going to be difficult, to be honest. But that's where I think the leaders that really would like to see this change, they have to get together and see, how can they join forces find common policy, etc., in order to really address this issue. And also, I think one needs to address also governments in fragile contexts and sort of say and really ask them what can they do for their own population. And also we have to see, how much can we change in terms of the way how we are working. We can already see today that a lot of changes happened from just 5 years ago when, for instance, World Food Programme used to hand out a lot of in-kind and food assistance. Today, cash is the modality. So I think it's also in terms of looking into, how can we change the way how we're working in order to meet these needs?
Abeer, certainly jubilant day, week and months ahead for the WFP, and much praise has been heaped not just on the show but all across the world on your organization. But as you know, there are some critics out there. Some economists are saying the WFP makes some nations too reliant on foreign aid, saying that food supplies often benefit corrupt politicians who then sell the food on the black market, destabilize market prices and hurt local farmers and producers. How do you respond to those charges?
The World Food Programme has an obligation to save lives, and that is the most important thing. Sometimes during the active conflicts, all what you need to do is just to save lives. Take examples of Yemen and Syria. I mean, the concept of self-reliance and independence and dependence on food assistance is very much on our areas of concern, but we cannot let people die. This is why we work during active conflict on saving lives, and then we work also on planning for changing lives by building the resilience of the people during active conflict. School feeding is an important example of how we can continue to save lives, but also work on the future of some of these communities for the post-conflict. It's very important to continue the life-saving work that we are doing, because at the end of the day, we have so many, and I speak here on behalf of the region also that I work in. We have over millions, 53 million people who are in need of food assistance just in the Middle East and North Africa region. Out of them, there are 20 million people in Yemen. It's very difficult to speak about self-reliance when people are wasting, when children are dying, when you're facing stunting, severe malnutrition. You have to save lives and then work on the next step.
Saving lives is the number one priority here, and then the political ramifications come second. Dave, hunger was actually, at least at my age, I still remember, was actually quite on the agenda in the late 80s with Bob Geldof, Live Aid, Somalia, and then it completely disappeared. And then in this part of the world, if you will, in our parts of the world, we started talking more about obesity and fast food and so on and so forth. So is this prize going to bring back this very urgent topic of food and widespread food all across the world back on the national and international agenda?
So I'm not entirely sure, but it's a great point when you reference the 80s. And what happened in the 80s, right after the Ethiopian famine, the United States built the famine early warning system and network, FuseNet, which is the long-range forecasting system. That needs to be updated. It needs to include climate. It needs to include pandemics. And we need to see something that's dramatically different in the decade ahead. And so if anything, I hope that this award puts energy behind the innovations that are going to be required in the decade ahead, and not simply to rely, like in the case of the United States, on FuseNet. I mean, we need something much more for the mid-21st century. So that's where I hope we go with this prize.
Benedicte, do you share that optimism?
I think when you work within this sector, you have to be optimist. If not, you wouldn't be able to get up the next morning. So I'm also an optimist for the future, but I think it's going to be an uphill struggle. But that's also why I think this prize is so important. Of course, this is a prize to World Food Programme for their great work, but I think all humanitarians also feel it's a little bit of their prize for the struggle that everybody has gone through and the work that everybody is doing on a day-to-day life. But at the same time, I also want to just echo that, yes, we need to be smarter, we need to be more innovative, but we also need to address the politicians and decision makers of our respective countries.
And hopefully the message with this prize has been heard loud and clear all across capitals around the world. Abeer Etefa, Dave Harden and Benedicte Giaever, thank you so much for joining us. And once again, congratulations to the UN World Food Programme for receiving the Nobel Peace Prize 2020. This wraps up this program, but thank you out there for watching. But I hope to see you again next time for a new edition of Newsmakers.